Hello, my name is LoG and welcome to another edition of LoG Power-Ups. Today's power-up, we will be focusing on using pick and fingers at the same time to play a string skipping type passage. Let's first check out what this power-up sounds like. This power-up will be split into parts 1, 2, 3, 4, and then the final part where we will play the entire thing along with a backing track that gradually increases tempo. Let's get started now with part 1. All right, the first thing to understand about this exercise is that the entire thing is literally just chords. And they're not even fancy chords. They're just normal 1, 3, 5, what are called triads. So major, minor, and there's one diminished chord in there. But it's all just 1, 3, 5. It might not sound like that because of the way it's being played, but that's really all it is. And the other idea that's going on here are the chord shapes themselves are what I would call, or what many people call, open chord voicings, meaning the notes are kind of spread apart, which gives it a more kind of open sound or more melodic sound. So let's talk about how that is actually created. It's really simple. So the first chord is this. It's literally just a G chord, and I'm playing the 1, then the 5, and then the 3 up top. So if I were to play a G chord with all of the notes within one octave, that would be something like this. That'd be me playing the G here, the 3rd here, the B on the A string, and then the open D string. So you can see what that sounds like. It sounds very kind of together, kind of clustered, nothing wrong with it, but that's not what's going on here. What we are doing to create a more open voicing is we're taking one of those notes and moving it to a different octave. The reason why this chord sounds kind of tight or clustered or dense is because all of these notes are within one octave. So here's the G, there's the 3rd, the B, there's the 5th, the D, and then the G above, kind of closing off that higher octave, is right there. So all of these notes are between this G and that G, kind of giving it that closed sound. But if I take one of the notes and move it to the higher octave, it'll sound more open, more melodic, in my opinion. So what do you do? Very, very simple. You always take the middle note of the chord, which in this case, because I'm playing 1, 3, 5, the middle note will be the 3, and I'm moving just the 3 up the octave and keeping the other 2 where they are. So the 3 now moves here. So now my chord sounds like this. 1, 5, right? Skipping the 3 and then playing the 3 up top. But that's not how I'm playing it. I'm playing it like this. It's the same exact thing, just the 5th is in a different spot. So instead of playing the 1 here and then having the 5 on the open string, I'm just physically playing the D here on the 5th fret of the A string, like that. So 1, 5, 3. Every single chord in this entire passage is like that. The reason why is because it feels good to do with pick and fingers, and it sounds nice. You kind of hear a little melody moving around on the top of the chord. So this first passage is that exact thing, except we're playing what are called inversions of the G chord. So here are the normal inversions of the G chord. So here's just plain G chord, 1, 3, 5, just in order. And then the next one will be here. This is actually still a G chord. It might not look like it, but it definitely is. The only difference is I'm playing the 3rd of the chord, the B, as the lowest note. That's the whole idea behind inversions. You have the same exact chord, but you change which note is in the bottom or in the bass. So because the chord has 3 notes in it, there are 3 ways to play the chord. You can play it with the root in the bass, which sounds like this. That's 1, 3, 5. Then you can play it with the 3rd in the bass. That's 3, 5, 1. Notice the order is always in 1, 3, 5 order. Right? Then the next one will have the 5 in the bass, which is here. That's the D. So this would be 5, 1, 3, right? D, G, B. Those are the chords that I'm playing. 1, 3, 5, G, B, D. 3, 5, 1, B, D, G. And then 5, 1, 3, the D, G, and B. Those are the 3 ways that you can play a chord, with the 1 in the bass, the 3 in the bass, and the 5 in the bass. And how am I finding those notes? Just major scale on 1 string, right? Here's my 1, 2, 3 is where I'll play the next chord. 4, 5 is where I'll play the final one, right? Super, super simple and really useful. So what we're going to do now is take all of those 3 chords. There's our normal 1, 3, 5, the first one, like that. And I'm moving the 3rd up the octave like I did earlier, and that gives me this. So instead of 1, 3, 5, it's now 1, 5, and then 3, because the 3, the middle note of this shape, is now down an octave, or up an octave, I should say, and I'm playing it here on the G string, which looks like that. G, the 1, D, the 5, and then the B right there, the 3rd. No D string in this chord, skipping it entirely. Then for the next one, we had this. Remember, we had the B, the D, and the G, the 3, 5, 1. Doing the same thing here. I'm taking the middle note, which is the 5 in this case, the D on the A string, moving that up an octave to the D on the G string, which now becomes this. The 3rd, exactly where it was, no 5th, right up to the root, so that's the 3rd, and then root, and then the 5 above. See the sound? Here's the lower one, the kind of clustered one, and then here it is when we move that middle note up an octave. It's more open, sounds a little more melodic. So here's the first one, play a little better. Then the next one with the 3 in the bass. These are still G chords. I'm not doing anything different, just moving the notes in a different order. Normal G chord with 1 in the bass, normal G chord with 3 in the bass, 3, 1, and then 5, the B, G, and D. And then the final one was this. Again, that's still a G chord, 5th, root, 3rd, so D, G, B. And do the same thing here. The middle note, which is the 1 now in this case, is going to go up an octave. So here it is within the octave. Here it is now with this 1 up the octave, keeping the low note, the 5, and the pointer finger note, the 3, in the same spots, but moving that G, which was here, now it's up an octave, which sounds like this. Really, really great. So here are all the closed kind of dense versions. And now here's what they sound like when I move the middle note up an octave. This is with the 3rd up the octave. That's with the 5th up the octave. That's with the root up the octave. These shapes sound really, really great, especially when you're playing with pick and fingers, because they sound kind of very, very much like you're playing it on piano, right? You can get some really cool sounds. Really, really nice, right? That's everything I played right there was just normal chords, 1, 3, 5 triads of G, C, and D, right? It almost sounds like, organ music or church music or something. Sounds really awesome. So anyway, we got one more chord, sorry. So here's the first G, next G with 3rd in the bass, next G with 5th in the bass. I'll play those shapes a little slower so you can see them. First one, next one, right? Ring, pointer on the D, no A string in this one, pinky there on the G string. And then this one, no A string again with this one, not playing that. D on the E string, B on the D string, then G up top, 12th fret G string. Last chord, before we finish the whole thing, looks like this. This is a different chord. I've now moved to a D chord, and here's a D chord. Same idea, right? Instead of playing normal 1, 3, 5, just in order, taking the 3rd, moving it up an octave, so it's right there now. And so now I have 1, 5, 3 up top. Same exact voicing as this. This is 1, 5, 3 of G. This is 1, 5, 3 of D, right? Same exact idea. Just looks a little bit different because it's on the A string, and the tuning of the guitar forces me to have its slightly different shape. So instead of playing this, I'm playing its inversion with the 3rd in the bass, which would look like this. Where's its 3rd? 1, 2, 3. And remember the shape we were doing earlier for the 3rd in the bass for the G? That's the 3rd, 5th root. Well, guess what? Here it looks identical, just now with D. That's our 1, our D chord. Here's its 3rd, F sharp. That's its 5th, A. And that's the D, the 1. Same exact shape. So this shape will always give you a 3, 5, 1 of a major chord, no matter where you play it. Of course, when you move down to the lower strings, it starts to look different because of the tuning issue, but just keep that in mind. So we're doing the same thing with this one. Instead of playing this just like that, we're taking the middle note, moving it up an octave. So now that A is now here. So instead of 3, 5, 1 of D, it's now 3, 1, 5 of D. And this is a voicing that you can play, but I'm not using this fingering. I'm using this fingering. It's literally the same thing. So instead of this, the 3, 1, 5, I'm playing 3, 1, 5. So instead of playing the D there, I'm just playing it here. It's the only difference. So you can see that little chord right there. Kind of looks like a normal minor chord, just with that D string note up a fret. So again, that's 3, 1, 5 of D, the chord that you're actually playing, right? So that's the last chord, and then the very last thing we do, we just play this humble G note right there, just by itself. That's it. So this whole passage, we're running through all these chords, the G, then the G again with the 3rd in the bass, then the G again with the 5th in the bass, then the D chord with the 3rd in the bass, and then finally a G. So in reality, it sounds like this. Sounds very involved. The funny thing is we're literally just doing this. Play that better. That's all we're doing. So, by the way, if you hear a snag like what you just heard, it's because my nails are in a disastrous shape right now because of the current COVID. I can't go to the nail salon and have my nails redone, so I'm working with scraps here for my nails. So I apologize. Again, all we're doing, G, 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 D, G. It's the exact same thing as just doing this. That's all we're doing, except we're utilizing these inversions, which gives it a really nice moving kind of melodic sound. So with that in mind, I'll play it one more time. Here are all the chords. First G, next G, 3rd in the bass, next G, 5th in the bass, and then the D chord, 3rd in the bass, and then this last G note right here, 10th fret A string. So technically what I'm doing, super simple. The entire thing is using a pick, middle finger, ring finger. That's all that's happening. Pick, middle, ring, pick, middle, ring. That's it. The only thing that you have to keep in mind is which strings you're picking. So this first one is E string, A string, G string. So I'm skipping the D string right there. But then the next one is E string, D string, G string, skipping the A string. So you do have to do a little bit of modification with the middle finger, but the pick and ring are for those first 2 chords. Actually, for the first 3 chords are always on the E string and then G string. So if you watch my right hand, first one, next one, see my middle finger move down to accommodate the chord. Next one is exactly the same. Pick on the E, middle on the D, ring on the G. Just like that. And then the next one, of course, because we're moving down to the A string, pick on the A string, middle on the D, ring on the B string, like that. And then the final, just picking that note right there. Now, as we continue the exercise in part 2, 3, 4, we're going to continue moving up like that. So just be aware that that's what's going to happen. The only thing that I think is really important, the angle of your hand, everyone kind of does it a little bit differently. Like maybe classical style would be easier for you. That's like having your wrist turned a little bit. For me, it's just putting your hands on the strings. However they naturally fall, that's the way you should be doing it, at least in my opinion. The angle of the neck can change. Some people find it more comfortable to have a more parallel to the ground neck. Other people find it comfortable to have it up. It's completely up to you. Just experiment. The only thing I would really recommend, though, when it comes to using pick and fingers is making sure that your fingers are prepping the strings before you pick them. In one of my other power-ups where we were doing that one where we're kind of holding a chord and picking it with pick and fingers, kind of talked about this a little bit, and it's super important, especially when you're doing it in a lead way, kind of what we're doing right here. So if you watch, every time I do this, every time I repeat the pattern with my right hand, my pick will pick the string, and then immediately after, the 2 fingers I'm using will be prepped, sitting on their strings, ready to go. So I'll do it in slow motion. Watch my right hand. So notice right when I pick the string, bam, fingers are sitting on their strings ready to go. It's kind of hard to see from this angle. Let me turn a little bit. See what I mean? It's really important, of course, to keep it comfortable and to be accurate and clean and all that stuff, but it actually has a lot to do with the tone. This has to do with, if you've ever played classical guitar, you don't pick the strings like this. So let's say this is your string, my pointer finger right here, and this is my finger picking the string. You don't just go like this, just you're not doing that. Your finger's not like just gently fluttering above the string. That's not what's happening if you're playing classical. If you want that full warm tone, you want to prep your finger on the string, apply pressure, and then pull. That gives it like a punch, a more warmth to it than just kind of grazing, here's my string, and just instead of going just grazing on top. That's not what you want to do. That's definitely not what you want to do here. You want the tone to be full and punchy. And the way to do that is to prep the strings, apply a little bit of pressure so that when you do pick the string, it's powerful. Instead of this like soft, weak sound, you want that pressure. And remember, at least in my opinion, I think it's important to do this type of technique and have the fingers sound consistent with the pick. I always find it kind of weird when I hear people play like this and it's so obvious when they're using their fingers and when they're using their pick, because the pick sounds really powerful and then the fingers sound really weak, right? And that's personally why I like the nails, because I think the tone is a lot more consistent with using pick and fingers. Of course, it depends. If you're using like a ton of distortion and compression and stuff, then everything will pretty much sound kind of, homogeneous or sound pretty uniform. But when you're playing clean, you'll really hear the difference. And I personally like to hear everything consistent. You might not. You might like the different tone that the finger gets, and that's totally cool. But for me, I like it sounding like I'm picking everything, even though I'm not. So something you can experiment with. But if you are doing this, I would really try to prep the fingers, sit on the strings a little bit before you pick, almost like you're gently spring loading the string and then you release. So again, I'm not just going like this, just fluttering on top, pressing a little bit, spring loading it, and then pulling. So that's pretty much the idea. That's what we're going to do for the entirety of this power-up. So, as long as that's comfortable, as long as you get that flowing smoothly, this power-up should be pretty simple. So for this track that we're going to play, I want you to actually practice it two different ways. I want you to play it in a way where you are playing just the chords, moving like this, or maybe just that single G for the last one. Only play those along with the track. So just to get the chord shapes in hand. And again, the way I'm picking that is pick and then two fingers, the two fingers that you'll be using at the same time. So there's no pattern here. It's just this. Right? And that's, to be honest, you can kind of play that in this entire power up like that because it sounds cool and it's valuable. But this is a really great way just to get the chord shapes really comfortable. And then once you're comfortable with the shapes, then start applying the shape. I should say applying the pattern. Now, throughout this whole power up, I'm going to kind of talk about two different ways to play this. You can play them, of course, like chords, like I just did, or you can play them like chords here, but with a pattern here. So all the notes are bleeding together. Kind of like, it sounds like you're holding a chord, you're arpeggiating a normal chord. That's the second way. And then the third way that you can play this is how I'm playing it in the actual video, and that is playing the shapes but separated so it sounds more like a lead, almost how a violin player would do it. So instead of this, holding the notes together, I'm separating them. So you can see my left hand here, I'm lifting gently every time I'm done playing the note, instead of holding them all down like this. So let me play that one. So it sounds a lot more separate. It sounds more like a lead, as opposed to holding them all together, which would sound like this. It's a very little subtle difference, but it is there, especially when you start playing it at the high tempos. So 3 ways that you can play this. Just the straight up chords, then the chords but having the pattern bleed all the notes together, or separating the notes. Like that. So you've got a variety of ways to do this. Experiment with all of them. So now let's get on to this track. Again, we're just doing this first part. Let me repeat it. Play a little slower so you can see everything. Ending on this G, and that's pretty much it. So here we go. right, that does it for part 1. If you guys enjoyed this type of instructional material, feel free to check out my Patreon at the link below, and I will see you in part 2.